Good afternoon, and welcome to our last session of INSA's week-long New IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men virtual symposium. Today's session is the Fireside Chat with Sisters Juliane Gallina and Kris Lovejoy. Now please welcome INSA Executive Vice President, John Doyen.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our Fireside Chat today with Sisters Juliane Gallina and Kris Lovejoy, the final session of this year's new IC program. This has been an extraordinary week, and we have been delighted with the positive feedback this event has already garnered. And yesterday's networking reception was a wonderful opportunity to connect in person, and I enjoyed getting to meet so many of you who I've interacted with virtually over the past 16 months. I can think of no better way to close out this program than with these two fearless women leaders. As always, we hope to make today's event as interactive as possible. Please submit your questions today through the questions box on the right side of your screen. As a reminder, this program is being recorded and is on the record. We also encourage you to share top takeaways from the program on social media using #TheNewIC. And finally, I would like to thank all our sponsors for their critical support of this program. We simply could not deliver this kind of programming without the support of our partners. Now I'm pleased to welcome Sam Cottrell, Vice President and General Manager for Gdit, who will introduce our moderator. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, John. Well, Gdit is delighted to sponsor this program once again. We are longstanding supporters of INSA's mission to bring the community together to solve our toughest challenges. For decades, Gdit has proudly served alongside the intelligence community, supporting missions critical to our national security and to the safety of all American citizens. With technology evolving at rates never before imagined, we remain committed to developing solutions that support the IC advanced capabilities and systems elemental to warfighter and intelligence operations around the world. At Gdit, we understand that delivering advanced solutions requires having a workforce with all types of backgrounds and experiences. A diverse team only strengthens our thinking and expertise, and in turn, our value to our customers. Diversity also inspires new ideas and different ways of approaching challenges. That is why Gdit is proud to support a culture that values diversity and inclusion, and we believe that this mindset makes us a career destination for talented individuals interested in supporting the intelligence and national security mission. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg, as President of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. And in this capacity, she directs INSA's daily operations and provides strategic guidance regarding membership, external partnerships, and policy initiatives developed by its member-led councils and task forces. Previously, she held several leadership positions with INSA, including serving as the organization's first Chief Operating Officer. In addition, Suzanne was the driving force behind the creation of the new IC program in 2018. Kudos to you, Suzanne. Each year, it just gets better and better. Now, please join me in welcoming Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg. Suzanne, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. I'm smiling because it's been a great week and we are ending on a high note. Thoroughly enjoyed yesterday's conversation that Sue Gordon moderated with Lieutenant General Mary O'Brien and a live networking session yesterday evening. So I'm smiling because I got to reconnect with so many dear friends that are INSA members. So now I am delighted to bring Kris Lovejoy, who is with EY and is the head of cyber global security there. Kris, welcome to the stage. And then Juliane, who I had the opportunity of hosting for a conversation about a year ago. When I started to get to know her back then, I'm like, wow, we've got to get her on the new IC programming. And then I met Kris, and what a wonderful pairing. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. So welcome Kris and Juliane to the stage, and I'm looking forward to the next hour, which I know will fly by. And I think that Juliane might be waiting on a camera request that should be popping up momentarily. So we'll see what happens with some of our technical. There we go. Hi, Juliane.
Hi.
So we've had the pleasure of talking a couple of times in the green room, both when we were prepping for today's session as well as a short time ago. And we talked a little bit about who some of the key influencers are in your career trajectories. But just to back up, can you tell us each a little bit, starting with Kris, a little bit about your career trajectory and who kind of you looked up to that got you to sort of the point where you are today.
Absolutely. And yeah, my career trajectory was completely and utterly accidental. So I started thinking that I was going to be an attorney or maybe an editor for the New York Times Book Review. Didn't exactly work out that way. I ended up marrying a Marine, and my ex-husband was a Marine officer who was stationed in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And so after I had spent some time in public service preparing for what I thought was my career, I ended up in Jacksonville in the early 90s. And I'm sure somebody on the phone here has been in Jacksonville, maybe in the 90s. And you know, as my mother would say, there wasn't much to do other than maybe go to a tattoo parlor or perhaps eat at Golden Corral or maybe, you know, go to an adult relaxation parlor. It wasn't, you know, much to do. So I decided to volunteer, and I became quite the expert in, you know, sort of computer-based communication amongst the deployed spouses of the Marines. And at a certain point in time, I got this bizarre idea in my head that I was going to buy some computers using, you know, soliciting some money from the local community and set up some computers using the internet to help the guys that were deployed at that time communicate with their spouses. So I got the computers, put them in the USO, and lo and behold, figured out they don't just magically wake up and start talking to one another. So I decided to learn this whole thing about internet, and I realized I could actually read binary. Go figure. So that made me kind of an in-house network engineer. And so when I got to DC, I actually got some engineering qualifications. I, you know, took some classes, certification classes, et cetera. Ended up working for a consulting company that put me at one of the Intel agencies for a bit. And at that point, I was doing, this is so long ago, Microsoft proxy server implementations and some network engineering, some Cisco routing, et cetera. That kind of made me a security person. And I took that education experience and I got a job at one of the first startups in the security field called TrueSecure. And that's where my career took off. I started as a pen tester. I joined another company as a CTO. We sold that to IBM. I became the IBM chief security officer for many years. And, you know, I've had some other opportunities along the way, and here I am today.
So you're a self-taught coder.
I'm not sure coder, hacker probably is
Okay.
a better way to say it.
And over to you, Juliane.
So my career had a lot more, I would say it was also somewhat accidental, but it had a lot of pipeline or structure in it because of the organizations I joined. I came out of the Naval Academy, went into the Navy as a cryptologist or focusing on signals intelligence at the time. They specialized me in space systems, and about midway through my active duty career, pivoted to become a CIA officer within the Directorate of Science and Technology. And I worked on space systems within the Intel community for quite a while, and then decided that I would jump to go to a small startup that my husband and some friends from the CIA had started, and took the leap. So it was about 35 people when I jumped into it. We grew it a little bit. It was purchased by a holding company, and then that flipped again to IBM. So this is another weird kind of intersection with my sister. We both found ourselves as accidental IBMers for quite a long time.
Yeah.
I ended up surprising myself and staying at IBM. They kept giving me really cool, fun things to do, and the people I was working with were brilliant and wonderful. So I stayed for a while, but I didn't, as I said, it was accidental. I never intended to be there for that long, and I knew I wanted to go back to government service at some point. So the opportunity to go back to the CIA popped up. I jumped on it. So that's where I am now.
You know, we've had the pleasure of hosting this week, as well as throughout the year, other female leaders who have gone to West Point or the Naval Academy or the Citadel. I'm curious, what was the catalyst for you to go to the Naval Academy? Because back, not that long ago, but when you were there, there were certainly women, I would assume, than there are there now.
Yeah, so there are so many reasons, and some of them require probably for you to have a drink and for me to have a drink to tell.
Happy to do that.
But the short, super condensed version of the story was I was ready to join the Navy and see the world, let's say, and I thought it would be really cool to get a great education along with it. It turned out, although I went to the Naval Academy, one of the reasons was to become a pilot in hopes of one day getting into an astronaut track. Obviously that never happened. And I always say it's a super good thing it never happened, because I'm a horrible driver and I would have been a terrible pilot and probably even worse, a wannabe astronaut. So everything kind of works out. I did get to work in space systems, which turned out to be a great blessing in my life, and created so many connections. So it all kind of works out.
So I know your mom is tuning in right now. So hi, Mom. I want to say hi to your mom. And, you know, we talked a little bit about, I believe your grandmother was immigrant to the United States, right? And then you were raised by a single mom. And cumulatively, between the two of you all, you have 4 daughters. So clearly, both as mentors and the individuals that help raise you, you have been influenced and have influenced women in your lifetime. Any advice you all would give young women, or that you have given your daughters, that's really tangible that folks could apply throughout their careers?
Jules, you want to start with that one?
Well, I guess it's probably worth mentioning our grandmother, the one we're referring to here, was a German immigrant who was just super tough. And I think one of the things that I take away from watching her and learning from her were lessons about resilience and endurance, because over her nearly century-long life, she lived till she was 98, she lived through World War I while in Germany, nearly starving, the whole transition to the United States, the Depression, the Second World War, and obviously as a German in a Jewish and Italian neighborhood in New York City, that was challenging for her and for her son, our father. So I mean, I learned a lot about resilience and survival, I think. And from our mother, curiously enough, in a very different way. She was a Brooklyn girl, Italian American, like you guys can picture it. It's really like the heart of our house is the kitchen. Our mother shows us so many lessons, I think, even today, about generosity and love and strength, and also resilience in a very different way, because she also has survived so many things and taught us that, I think this is where the career point comes in. She taught us very early on that we needed to be able to count on ourselves no matter what. And it was very clear, because we lost our father early on, unfortunately, that her lesson was explicit. It was make sure that no matter what, even if you are, you love somebody, you can't necessarily expect that the world will create the circumstances where they'll be there all the time. So you have to be able to take care of your own children, even without a partner, which was a kind of a rough but very practical lesson for us to hear, but also live and like through our own personal experience and see firsthand. And so to get to your question about what are the things we teach our daughters, I think that lesson has echoed through the generations now, fourth generation, where I look at our daughters and our sons, and I think it's really there that hopefully we're giving them a living example of resilience, but also teaching them, you know, it's good to love people and create connections and dependencies, but you have to always kind of have your backup plan, unfortunately.
Yeah. And having 3 daughters, I think having a partnership with someone is wonderful, but I think it's also very crucial that they're independent and can stand on their own 2 feet, whatever they have to face. So how about you, Kris?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely echo, you know, what Julia said. You know, what I would add is, you know, it's interesting because, and sometimes I almost wonder and I worry a little bit that, you know, the fact that we grew up in such a female-dominated environment gave us an advantage in a way. Because even as I look at my other grandmother, so my other grandmother She worked with her husband at a gas station, and she pretty much ran the business. My grandfather was the guy that shook hands. My grandmother was the person that ran the business. She was brilliant. She graduated from high school, but never had anything beyond that. She was the person that would do the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink, on the weekends in like 10 minutes. And, and I remember growing up and just thinking about the strength of these women, the unheralded strength and their ability and capacity to manage their families. And so, even when we lost our father, it wasn't that strange for me to see my mother taking kind of that role. And so the only thing I would add on to, what Julie said is, I think another lesson that our mother gave us is the lesson of how important it is to be honorable and to have a mission. And I think that's the other piece that has given us both an advantage in so much as I think both Julie and I, if you look at kind of what we've done over our careers and the commitment we have to our country, to our family, to our community, I think that's because of my mother, because she taught us the strength of just working together in a community, and that together with forgiveness and with the ability to adapt, one can overcome anything. And I think, just sort of myopically in our field, that ability to create those human connections, to forgive people, to be able to deal with crisis, to be able to sort of collaborate, that has actually given us, again, another advantage. And so, for better or for worse, I think our losses and our lenses have given us this sort of unique perspective. And so those are the things that, Julie, our daughters who actually live together, we spend, I think a lot of time in kind of building them up so that they feel that. And I look at, both of our girls, they're just amazing. Like my daughter, she's an attorney. She just graduated from law school and won a fellowship, and now she's delivering victims' rights support to the victims of human trafficking. And so that's her thing, and she's just focusing on human trafficking. So it's just amazing, amazing set of folks that we're surrounded by.
It sounds like it. I would love to get to know your family better and be a part of it. I know everything.
Sunday dinner, it just come on over.
Yeah, you have to like
Pull up
meatballs
a chair. My mother's saying, just add a little water to the pot. It's fine.
Yes,
Stretch the soup.
So yesterday, Lieutenant General O'Brien talked a little bit about some assumptions that came with bias. I shared with you all an assumption I made this week with an email, and I'm mortified that during the week of the new IC Empowering Women and Engaging Men Symposium, I did this. But everyone, I think, from time to time has some sort of unconscious bias or assumption. And Lieutenant General O'Brien mentioned how for a paper, she kind of anonymized her name. Instead of Mary in cursive, she put M. O'Brien in block. And this was several years ago, but she noticed a bit of an improvement in the grading. Can either of you all talk about a situation where there may have been, whether it was a conscious or unconscious bias, and maybe how you worked your way around that? I know, Kris, you specifically.
I love my sister's example.
Okay.
Please, Kristen, you got to tell this.
We tell each other stories often, so I think we could we could write a book about some of these experiences. I mean, one of the more famous ones is when I was the CEO of a startup in the security space, and I was invited to a VC conference, for the CEOs of startups. And, we were spent 2 days in just deep discussions. It was about 50 guys and myself. I was the only woman in the room. And at the end, the closing session was about diversity, diversity on the C-suite. And this guy who was next table to me stood up and he said, I'm really tired of this conversation. I'm sick of it. I want you to look around this room. There is not one woman CEO sitting in this room. Now I ask you, is it them or is it us? Is it them or is it us? And meanwhile, I'm doing this. Hey, finally, the guy sitting next to him pulled on his jacket and said, hey, she's a CEO. And he looked over at me and he said, oh, I thought you were one of those events people. It's like, dude, I've been talking this whole time. You thought I was an events person. And it was just, I think that encapsulates, and this is a very recent experience over the past couple of years, kind of encapsulates the fact that it's still happening. We still have those biases.
Yeah, I had a kind of, I don't know how similar it is, but there's another bias test, I guess you could call it, when I had arrived early to a conference room for a meeting that was a technical exchange meeting, and I had my laptop up and I was sitting there, and a gentleman I recognized as a tech director for a sister business unit walked in. He saw me there with my laptop, and he looked at the clock and he looked at me and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong room." But I knew he was on the invite list, and I knew he was supposed to be there. And I said, "No, I think you're in the right place." He said, "No, it can't be. It's a technical meeting I'm looking for." And he walked out. And I just thought, I know I'm in the right place. I'm pretty sure he's going to come back and come to his own conclusions. But to me, maybe I was too sensitive and jumped to the wrong conclusion, but I took it to mean that he thought there was no way I could be technical. So, whatever, that doesn't necessarily bother me, because we should all be building our own credibility based on what we do and how we match our actions with our value systems and our experience and our skills and how we deliver. And I think I always have had that opportunity. So I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but that was just kind of a funny moment.
I can only imagine, and I'm sure when he realized who you were, he was somewhat mortified.
No,
So.
I don't think so. No, I mean,
Really?
no, but that's okay. That was kind of a character, it's just the way it is. I don't think he felt mortified at all.
So I have a couple more questions that I've prepared, and I'm selfishly going to ask them. And then I see some questions rolling in from our attendees, and I will get to as many of those as I can. But I was talking to one of our graduate student interns yesterday who has two sisters, and I was asking her about, were they ever competitive? Who was she closest to? And we talked a little bit about different times in her life. Each of them pushed her in different ways to do things, or pushed her over the edge possibly in other ways. But has there been sort of a healthy competition with you all during your childhood, when you were teenagers, college, during your professional career? Could you talk a little bit about that relationship? Because sometimes there is good and bad sibling rivalry. I can certainly attest to that.
What do you think, Kris? That's a good question.
It's a good question. I think there's a famous time when I was Mom will recount the story, wasn't it? I was about 8, and I found the Christmas presents. And I thought you were getting that doll, that Madame Alexandra doll, and I was so mad. So yeah. I think I remember back, and I'd say that was the one time I was super jealous. But I'll be honest, I think, Suzanne, and maybe it's the
doll was hers, by the way.
It was mine. It was mine. I still have it too. But suffice to say, and I don't keep it in my living room, but I do have it.
Juliane got the Cabbage Patch girl instead.
Yeah. But I think in our unique circumstance, we had to take care of each other. And so even now, we share like a lot, like we share our mom, right? And so, but you get her this weekend. But she's with my sister in the week, and I get her on the weekend. Our daughters are sharing a living space. We share, like our dogs share parentage. It's kind of a weird dynamic family relationship. So I don't think I am super unbelievably proud of my sister. And so I don't think there's anybody that's smarter or better than she is. And in fact, I was just talking about her this morning, and with some colleagues that we've known. So to me, it's a kind of a funny question, but I would answer no. It's more of if anything, it's more just wanting to make sure that she is always okay. That's kind of my overwhelming feeling.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. Thank you, Kris. I feel similarly that we had each other's back. I think this gets to the point about resiliency. The circumstances of our father's sudden death was so daunting for our family and really tough on us that I give my mom a lot of credit for holding us together. I think some other families may have really just fallen apart. But she taught us to always look out for family, look out for each other. Also, I think the space between us allowed us to be our own person. Our mom likes to say that we're like 3 only children in our family. We have a younger brother. And honestly, like if anybody's jealous, Kristen and I are jealous of our brother because he married a doctor and he's doing just fine.
Yeah.
He did best of all.
Yeah,
he's got a really good life, and just
Oh my gosh.
admire him.
yeah, that's for 2 drinks. Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, even considering your success and where you all are in your careers, what challenges do you all see? You know, we talked about bias, but that are in the workplace for young women, either looking to break into a cyber career or a career in the intelligence community, which is still, you know, the numbers, although CIA is doing amazingly well with a lot of female leaders. What is like the #1 barrier you all see that young women have to overcome in your career?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't want to dismiss challenges. I just feel that things have palpably changed in the span of my own career, and I'll give you. I used to sort of look around periodically at the demographics in the room in different meetings. It was kind of a thing I did when I got bored in a meeting, and I noticed over the course of my career, it's empirical, so maybe it's not statistically sound because I was doing my own little sampling, but it's my own perspective is that over time I've seen women break through glass ceilings, certainly in the intelligence community, with these great leaders like Sue Gordon and Betty Sapp, and I could go on and on and on. And I've seen them go from being mid-level managers and then seniors and then become the directors. So, I mean, those ceilings for us in the Intel community have been smashed. Jeannie Tyson, or my predecessor's another one, it's just like, you know, crushed it. So I'm really happy to say that there's very few firsts left, I think. Now, I do note, though, also that there's this other second order issue that was percolating along. When I started seeing some of the first women become, you know, get to sit at the table, it's like the Intel community, you guys know this because we're still brick and mortar. We still troop into the conference rooms and sit at the big table, and the senior sits at the end, and the principals around the sides, and then the strap hangers around the back. I saw them move from the perimeter of the room to the front, to the head. But what I also noticed was the frequency of women with children increased over time. And so I think there's something here that's not unique to women. It's really an issue for men and women both, is really how do we care for our families and still succeed at work? Because I think 10, 15 years ago, the principals I was seeing were really didn't have their own children. I could go on, but it's still, like I said, not statistically sound sampling that I'm doing, but that was my observation.
Dude, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because again, part of the discussion yesterday was, you know, putting an out of office because you've got to go to your kid's puppet show, and you make it private because you don't want anybody to know that you're a mom or taking time off, and now people don't have to always make that private. It's, you know, you have kids. People know dads have kids, other parents, and I do feel like, at least when I look back to my career early on, it's okay to have a personal life and to be human. And earlier in my career, I feel like you had to kind of keep that in the shadows. How about you, Kris?
No, I definitely think things are progressing. I do, though, and I do feel very strongly that we still have some work to do. So if you look, I look at it, I love statistics, and I look at it statistically, and what we see, particularly in the cybersecurity field, is that the mid-career drop-off rate is significant. So you've got, statistically, you'll see about 36 to, in some industries even higher percentages, 42% of those who are entering the field are women. By the time you get to manager level, the drop-off is acute. You drop down to like 10%, and then you come back up. at about 17%. And that's because you're bringing in folks from other fields to kind of, sort of fit the diversity quota, if you will. And what's happening is, and I think that the problem on the mid-career side, and this is, I think probably primarily on the commercial side, is it's a nuance in how we treat women as they're taking that next step. And let me give you a practical example. I'm looking at the stats even within EY and, saying, what's going on here? And so I went and I started interviewing some managers that didn't necessarily leave, but had some thoughts about whether they wanted to progress in their careers. And I asked them, so what's going on? And they said, well, and this became kind of a trend that I identified, isolated, and then we fixed. But they said, during the interview process, when I was going for that next step, I sat down and, invariably who I'm interviewing with is men, but, a couple of women. But what they say to me is, gee, this is going to be a big step. You're going to need to travel. You're going to need to work a lot of hours. Are you sure that your family has coverage? Are you sure that, you have like the support around you to be able to, do both of being a mom and as well as being, assuming that you have a family, or if you want to have a family, you can do both. And one woman said to me, and it just resounded, she said, it made me feel like I had to choose. I couldn't both work here and be effective and be a mother. And, when I asked men, do you ever get asked that question? Never. Never have I met a man who has been asked the question of how are you going to take care of your kids at work? And so I think that, there's still, going back to that, the initial question about unconscious biases, even in the interview process, we have to be careful about those signals that we might be giving those with whom we're communicating, and not inadvertently create a situation where they feel like they have to choose, because that is an unfair choice. Now, not to say that men aren't running into this as well. I mean, I was in a call yesterday where, one of the guys that was presenting was talking about capacity challenges because one of his employees, decided to go on paternity leave, and he was going to have to go talk to him about that. And I was like, whoa, we're calling HR on that one, because that's totally okay to go on paternity leave. But, suffice to say, I think that, that whole question about, good parent versus good worker, it's got to, as you were pointing out, it's got to stop.
And, there have been some studies recently about COVID and how that is impacting in the workforce, and women are having, or had to, particularly with childcare issues. And sometimes women are the default parents, not always. Sometimes men take on that role of being the default parent, but, leave the workforce. Although I wonder if to a degree the pendulum could swing a little bit, because, and hopefully somewhat in the IC, but more in the private sector, there's more flexibility now. And it just because flexibility doesn't mean you have, you can watch your kids while you're working 40 to 60 hours a week, but you can sometimes, I think, be a little more creative about your hours that you work to the environment. So I'm hoping that ultimately the positive of flexibility could potentially help, those folks who've had to leave the workforce because they really just couldn't bear the expense of childcare during the pandemic. I don't know.
Suzanne, can I jump on something here? And it hasn't been an explicit theme question, because you were asking about what's left for women, I think, and how do we advise younger women who are coming up through the ranks? And I think I broaden the challenge to the leaders. Like, what are we telling fellow leaders about diversity? And I feel like when I look back on my career, I'm struck more and more by the risk that seniors to me took, the risk they took to accept me and to hire me. I was the unknown. I was the diversity choice, and they saw something in me. And these, 100% of them, men who were raised in their very traditional organizations, whether it was the Navy or IBM or the CIA, gave me a chance. And I think there's a little bit of something we don't talk about much in diversity circles, and that is we do, but not as a nod to those people who took the risk first. And I want to tell the mid-level managers who are or women or other minorities, they can be that ladder for someone else in some other diversity category. And we have to put our, I don't know, it just flips the perspective around a little bit to think that we all have to be challenging ourselves. I think we have to look around and say, who else needs the help? Who else is being overlooked? The early 90s, women were the thing. That was our decade. In fact, I've read some articles that say feminism peaked in 1993, which would be unfortunate. But anyway, I'm talking too much. I think I need.
No, you're not at all. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the name of this event is the new IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. And for me personally, some of the very best mentors and bosses I've had have been men. So they're very much a part of this equation, and have helped some of us get to where we are today. How about you, Kris? Anything you want to share on that topic?
Yeah, and it's just practical advice that I would give to women who are trying to break through the ranks. Because one of the things that I do see, and this is another kind of form of unconscious bias, historically women are reluctant to tout their capabilities. So if you are looking at a man versus a woman, they both have the same academic record, the same experiences. The men will sort of create a resume that sort of reflects all of that, and the woman will be more humble. It's just kind of, it's scientifically just sort of how it works. And so that by default will create some unconscious bias, because you think the men are so much more sort of capable. Now, what I've always advised, just practical advice, is that for women who feel uncomfortable about talking about themselves or even finding a mentor, one of the things that you can do that's fairly easy is create groups, small groups of friends or peers within your organization that will speak on your behalf. Have a kind of, I call it, sort of, it's co-influencing. And so what you do is you'll say to, talk to someone and say, listen, if there's an opportunity for you to talk about me, I'll talk about you. But create these relationships where you are advocating and amplifying your experiences and capabilities, or somebody else's capabilities, because there's a payback principle. If you do it, they'll do it for you. And so I think that is one of the things, in addition to creating the mentors, you can create those communities of sort of co-evangelists who will enable your career in settings where you're not.
Sort of like you all do as sisters. You mentioned, Kris, you were on a call today, and you Juliane. So well said. So, okay, I'm getting to a few of our audience questions. And this question is for you, Juliane. I'll have another one for you, Kris. Rachel Cunningham wants to know, what do women uniquely bring to the intelligence community? Great question, Rachel.
Handbags.
That was really good.
That is a great question, Rachel. My sister's laughing. I could tell her made her laugh. I can't think of anything that women, by our biology, are bringing that's unique to the problem solving. Because I've just seen a lot of, gosh, Rachel, wherever you are out there, I hope you reach out to me, because I'd like to know if you had a hypothesis. Maybe you can text it in, but I want to know if you had a hypothesis for that question and you're hoping I was going to say something, because I really think we bring so many strengths, and I don't necessarily think that women are different. I think there's a lot in the media about women think differently, or women are more empathetic, or women have a higher emotional intelligence. I'm not sure that really gives the true meaning of inclusiveness. It's full interpretation, because even if it's not, even if that women do that in large quantities, that isn't unique to women.
Yeah, I think you're right. It would be making a very broad generalization, I think, to come up with something maybe other than handbag. So, Kris, this question is from Brittany. She wants to know, do you see any differences between private sector versus public sector cultures regarding women in the workforce and specifically technical fields. And I know it seems like you spent predominantly most of your life in the private sector, but you have served in the public sector, and your sister does as well. So I think you're very well qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, it feels, and I don't have any evidence one way or another, but it does feel as if, within the public sector, the bias probably isn't as pronounced as it can be in some other private sector industries. And, there are just some, industries like energy, et cetera, where it just, I think historically has been a very sort of male dominated industry. And so therefore, those that you would pull into those industries would just, sort of naturally sort of reflect the industry. So I do think that, based on the conversations with Julie and yourself and others, it feels a bit, as I said, more pronounced. And it also could be, my reflection is based on the fact that I do a lot of global work. I'll do a lot of work in the Middle East, for instance, and that there it is particularly pronounced. Or working in Japan, attitudes toward women and different, sort of ethnic minorities is perhaps not as advanced as it is here in the States. And so you see a lot of that baggage, sort of coming into the private workplace as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, especially the global aspect of bias. So Jared Hardesty wants to know, how are you each working to mitigate unconscious bias in your own management and hiring decisions? Somebody talked about how, they have anonymized resumes to rule out gender, or any other aspects that might cause bias, unconscious bias.
I'm going to answer, I just want to start by answering the question and saying, one of the first ways I start is with myself. Because I'll be honest with you, I know I've got a lot to learn. And I want to go back to, sort of our children. If you met our girls, you'd say, the edges haven't worn off yet. They are very vocal with their opinions on life, philosophy, you name it, they're very vocal. But suffice to say, a good example of me training myself and training others is I had my daughter do a women in technology thing. And I deliberately had a question asked, which I knew we don't agree on, which is, if you see instances of unconscious bias, how do you deal with it? My way of dealing with it is kind of soft shoe, is have a conversation, try not to beat somebody over the head, just try to help somebody see your perspective by standing in your shoes. My daughter's approach to this is by whacking him on the head with a hammer and then putting him in a Hulk Hogan, wrestling move and then kicking him in the shins a couple of times. And that's just her way of doing things. Now, when you look at that, you sort of see that, you say to yourself, okay, well, what is one way better, one way worse? The point is that different generations interpret reactions to unconscious bias differently. And we have to recognize that. And so I always have to check myself, because what I'm doing may be good for my generation, might be acceptable, it's the way you behave. But when it comes to my daughter, my niece, that's not what they're expecting of me as a leader. And so I have to learn myself how different groups think about this issue so that my behaviors can reflect their needs. So it's not just a question of, what am I doing about, sort of the outside world? It's what am I doing for me to make me as a better leader in this area?
Yeah, that's well said. I offend my daughters on a daily basis, and I think it is I did it this morning, a generational thing.
I think Kristen's really hitting on an important point. And I could take my answer down kind of a formal path and describe how, at least in my agency, there are certain mechanisms that are built into processes to prevent unconscious bias. For example, we have a diversity rep in every selection panel for every job. We have a female rep in every panel. There's an outside rep, meaning someone outside your own organization, so that you're not hiring people from within all the time and unconsciously selecting people who look and feel and act just like you. So there's stuff like that, but that's kind of it's very government, right? That's a lot, that's the formal mechanisms. What surprised me this past year, and I can't say I did it on purpose, the outcome, the unintended happy consequence of what we did was not the original intention. Let me explain. So we have a communications team who helped me do messages to the workforce throughout the year. And sometimes they're ad hoc. We sent out a message from the CIO because of a particular event that happened, or an incident, or something, you know, whatever. That you get these from, everyone listening here has a manager who sends out a group email, right? So like, think of it that way. And it comes from the CIO's title. We release one for pretty much every holiday throughout the calendar. And we went through the calendar over a year ago and really reviewed it to add in holidays that hadn't been recognized formally by the federal government before. And it was sort of a delightful surprise to see how many came in. We canvassed the team. So now I get to release a little newsletter or email from my pen, but I felt kind of sheepish about it. I'm like, guys, I pretty much know nothing about a lot of these holidays. Right. Let's make this the voice of our employees so we can understand how do our employees experience this particular holiday. I found it to be one of the most delightful surprises of the whole past year, because seeing the holiday and the things we celebrate and the things we value through the eyes of our employees who are approaching it with so many different perspectives. So July 4th, for example, we had people who wrote in talking about experiences of July 4th while being overseas, or being minorities, or from their perspective as parents or family members, or related to veterans, for example. There are so many different perspectives, but I think it really kind of speaks to this: how do we beat back unconscious bias? It's in that human connection and putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and trying to see things and experience things the way they do. Even though I guess, you know, fundamentally that might be kind of impossible, it's really in the striving that we begin to solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think that connection, and then, you know, Vince Stewart joined us for a conversation a few months ago and talked about building relationships that also allow you to be vulnerable, and having those conversations that could be a little uncomfortable, but so you understand other people's perspectives. And I think that's a best practice we could all, like, everybody's looking for tangible takeaways this week, and I think that is one. And sometimes people just don't know how to have those conversations to get other people's perspectives. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I still have questions rolling in, and I have 13 minutes. So I will defy my Southern roots and try to speak as quickly as possible. And I did want to let you know that the question from Rachel, she wrote back. Thanks, Rachel. Good to hear from you again. She just wrote, thanks, ladies, for being here today. She was just trying to move beyond the obstacles to women and kind of focus on the positive of what women bring to the table. And I think probably we all as individual women, you know, it's not my blueberry muffin recipe because I don't have one, but I do feel like maybe compared to a few male colleagues, you know, maybe I bring empathy, or I bring understanding of what it's like to be a female in the workplace. But that's just me. And again, my male colleagues, you are all very empathetic people. That was not a criticism of you, so please don't take it personally. So Harry Brooks wants to know, as mentioned, a lot of progress has been made recently to empower women to be successful in the intelligence community. But as Kris said, a lot of work remains. What concrete steps can men take to recognize the barriers and glass ceilings women face and move this process along? Great question, Harry. Kris, Juliane, jump ball.
Since it's IC related, Julie, you want to start? I can.
It's IC related, but I think it really touches on some of the themes that you talked about earlier, Kristen, where you talked about the opt-out rates for women who are mid-career, and especially now. So in the intelligence community, we're all getting back to work. We're getting into our buildings. We tend to be isolated in our brick and mortar buildings on secure networks. We don't have as much connectivity to the networks and communications that most other parents have. And so I guess I would say we need to pay attention to the opt-out rate for women and for men, and in particular parents of young children right now, because I think for the intelligence community, there's a risk that people are going to opt to take roles that would allow them to work from home, continue to work from home, because there's something very wonderful about seeing your children grow up, being with them, having that flexibility, and being accessible. So that's one thing. I think along those lines, if you're a technical person or you work with technical people, I think you said his name was Harry, boy, we'd love to have some great solutions for ways that we can keep the communications open, do more intelligence work outside of our brick and mortar buildings. There's a kind of a technical answer there. So if you're not like looking just for diversity and inclusion kinds of initiatives, there's technical things you can do to help keep us all in touch with our children and our families.
Agreed. I mean, I know I send my pet to the boarding facility and there's an app and I can watch her play in the playroom, right? I mean,
right.
Be nice to have that in a skiff. Know what your kid's up to. So
good idea, Suzanne.
Yeah, and I would just add some very practical things. I always would mentor any sort of male manager that was working for me where we were trying to build diversity into the team. Some of the things to look for, and I've touched on some of these before, is just when you're doing a sort of performance review or promotion review, be careful of some unconscious triggers that might be there. Make sure this is when you're working with a female who is sort of building her profile, ensure that she's adequately boasted about herself, that she is sort of really taken content and is less humble than perhaps she feels comfortable. Make sure that she's publishing that. Be careful in meetings and making sure that particularly where women are being talked over. It happens to me still. And I don't know why, but it just happens. Just be careful. Try not that you don't want to be rude, but you also want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to, sort of communicate fairly. And so, to the extent that you can see somebody's being spoken over, make sure that that person is brought to the fore. And then last but not least, and this is one of my little things drives me crazy, is we're very insensitive when it comes to graphic images that we use in presentations, et cetera. Like the other day, I was looking at one where it was, 3 people running a race, a marathon, and there was a guy that was outpacing 2 women. That's not necessary. But just, you can find a picture of 3 people at the same level. Just right. Go find another one. But just be on the lookout for little things. Try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and be on the lookout for those triggers that may, create those biased environments.
So this is one of my questions that I didn't get a chance to ask earlier, but earlier in my career, I feel that I would go to conferences, focused on empowering women, and they would talk a lot about work-life balance and how hard it was, and can you have it all? And my perception is personal that we have less of those conversations because it's just assumed that we've figured all of that out. Still, it comes up from time to time, I think, in smaller settings. But can women have it all?
I like what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. I think it was attributed to her where she said, women can have it all, just not at the same time. And I think there's a lot to that because, and this really is applicable to any human being who has a long work life that spans over decades. You live through different phases where the people around you need different things. And the primary reasons that I dropped out of the CIA the first time around was family driven. It was, I needed to do that for a family member at the time. I felt it was my own personal choice. People will say, oh, you didn't have to, but that's what I felt compelled to do. Industry gave me tremendous flexibility at a time that I didn't see it at the time in the intelligence community. I probably should have given my managers a little bit more of a chance. So I think as managers, we have to have a lot of empathy for our employees, male or female, to look at where they are in the phases of their life so that they can learn how to balance it. Because I think what I did in that example was choose to manage it my own way without asking for help. I didn't want to ask for an exception. I didn't want an accommodation. I thought that would reflect poorly on me. Not realizing it wasn't just a woman issue, it wasn't just a mom issue.
Right.
It's a human issue. We all have families, and we're all part of networks of people who care about us, and we care about them. So yeah, I think we can have it all, but you just gotta give and take sometimes.
And whether
you need
you're
to rely on people to let you surge for a while in your career, and sometimes you have to throttle back. It's a long career if you're lucky.
And like you said, I think that's applicable to whether it's a male or a female in the workplace, as far as personal constraints. And my guess is you may look back and wish you'd ask for that flexibility, but at the end of the day, you may not regret ultimately what your decision was, putting, you know, that personal commitment first. So any thoughts on that, Kris?
No, I couldn't say it better.
Okay, so we just got a few more minutes before I close things out. Any words of wisdom, anything we didn't cover? This is your platform for the next couple of minutes. Start with you, Kris, that you want to share with folks.
Ooh, that's a good question. And let me.
I could tell a story while you're thinking.
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead. You do that.
Okay. So I'll try to keep it quick, but
Sure.
I still feel really badly about this. So maybe if if I hurt somebody's feelings in the past, this will help them understand where I was coming from. So I went back to my alma mater a couple of years ago and met with some midshipmen, and we were having a really great career conversation. This one young man who happened to be from the Bronx, not too far from where Kristen and I originally started, he said to me, he said, "Ma'am, can you tell me, how do you know when to speak up?" Kind of reminiscent of the Sheryl Sandberg lean in questions, right? Like, when do you lean in? When do you lean out? How do you know when to engage? And I was so flippant. I said, and I still feel badly about this, I said, "Oh, honey, you're from the Bronx, just like me. We speak up." And, he kind of laughed and things moved on. And a week goes by, and I was in another session back at the agency with employees, and it was put together by the African American Council within our directorate. And there were a lot of women there who were talking about speaking up and leaning in. And the same question came up, same exact question. And instead of being so flippant, I turned to the person asking the question and said, "Well, what do you think? Well, what governs when you speak up?" And she said, "Well, that's my problem." So where I grew up in the South, in my family of origin, I was told for my own benefit, my own safety, to be quiet and not to speak up. That children were meant to be, seen, not heard. And even as a young woman, when I grew up, I was told, you just wait for people to call on you. I've really struggled with this in my career. And it struck me like a bolt of lightning. I recall that I had told that young man a couple weeks before, "Oh, honey, you're from the Bronx, it's fine." Well, I think we all really need to allow each other that time to lean in and speak up. But I think sometimes we make much of categories. We kind of atomize our workforce into, are you a woman or a man? Are you an engineer or not? Are you African American or not? Like we're kind of subcompartmentalizing everything.
Right.
And I don't think we should dismiss that our homes of origin, I think Kristen and I are a really good example of this. Your home of origin has so much influence on you. And it isn't so much whether you're male or female, it could just simply be the way you were raised and your perception of the world influencing whether you lean in or not. And so for all of you who are listening, I apologize if I've ever been flippant in my answer, said, "Oh, honey, you're from the Bronx, it's all going to be okay." Truly, we need to make time to hear each other. But also, I think all of us as humans on the planet need to check in to say, what did that home of origin teach me? And is it what I need in the workplace? And ask for help.
Definitely something to ponder. Thank you, Kris. Anything else you want to add?
Again, a brilliant answer by my brilliant sister. I would just echo that. As I reflect on this, coming from the commercial sector, from a largely global role, the one thing I would remind everybody, on the phone is that, and I know you hear it, and I know, again, this may sound a bit flippant, but we are very lucky here in the United States to, the end. We are very lucky that, even though we have, from a regional perspective, from a, even within the United States, a cultural perspective, there are very different the sort of ways in which people are raised, it's not quite as divergent as it is overseas. And so I think we all have to recognize that, you know, as we are bringing in people that may not be sort of native US origin, their educational experience, their cultural experience, the biases that they come with are so overwhelmingly different than that which we experience here. And so there is just a level of sensitivity that I think that we have to apply, you know, within this sort of thought process, because, you know, as I said, it's just these differences do prevail.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. You know, we still have a long way to go, I think, but we're much better off than a lot of other geographic areas. So go America. So ladies, thank you so much. This has been fun. You've got my email. So when you're ready to have me over for dinner, I want to come, whoever's house is hosting your mom, because I want to meet her. And I hope we can welcome you all back at some point in person when all of our in-person events start in September. It's been a great week and a great tone to end with the two of you. And so I wish you all a wonderful Friday and weekend. And it's just been an incredible week. I want to thank all of our public and private and academic sector leaders who joined us this week. Thank you to all of our 700 attendees who tuned in throughout the 5 days to talk about diversity, gender, abilities, ages, different perspectives. And once again, I want to thank Gdit and all of our sponsors for their support. It's really been a rewarding opportunity to be able to host this. And I know I'm leaving with some actionable takeaways. I hope everyone else has as well. And it's always an abrupt ending, but have a great weekend and look forward to having a lot of you all tune in the next few weeks in some of our virtual events. Thanks again.